Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see this wonderful crowd. And it's a pleasure for me to introduce to you today Enrique Seira, who is, in fact, a new professor here at Notre Dame and a new particular institute. Enrique is the Loughrey Professor of Economics at the Department of Economics. And before joining Notre Dame this year, he was the Addy Distinguished Professor of Economics at Michigan State University. And before that, he was the director of the Center for Economic Research at ITAM in Mexico. Enrique's research focuses on development economics, democracy, and the judicial system. And his current interests center on democratic backsliding, corruption, as we will see today, and the rule of law. And it's delightful to have him today because his work clearly is the type of work, high-level work in the social sciences that connects multiple disciplines and talks to multiple audiences, which is precisely the type of work that we want to develop here at the Kellogg Institute. For those of you who are following online, I would like to remind you that you can post questions below your viewing window. Then we can refer to the presenter at the end of the talk. There are different cultures in terms of questions, so I know that some people will ask clarifying questions during the talk, and Enrique is fine with that. But also, I guess many other people will save their questions, the more substantive questions, to the end. So we'll make sure to leave 15 minutes on the end for Q&A. Enrique, it's great to have you.
Thank you. So thank you, guys. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to get to know you, and I think this is a very good way to do that. This project is a joint project with Eduardo Rivera and Samit Raja. And it started about 5 years ago when I heard Mario Vargas Llosa say in an interview that corruption is the poison of democracy. Okay, when I heard that rang true to me. I thought it was true, but then trying to look at the academic literature backing that causal claim, we couldn't find much. And so the idea of this project is to try to provide some evidence on this claim, whether corruption affects democracy and how it does that. Okay, so the context is one we know and care about, that of democratic backsliding. And we know this evidence is very present in the room. Analysts have said that democracy is backsliding, that autocracy is making gains against democracy. BDAM, for example, says that the level of democracy now is comparable to what it was in the 80s. But beyond analysts and experts, there's also votes. Several papers have shown that populist authoritarian leaders are gaining ground in some countries. About a quarter of the countries, according to this paper, the ARs are governed by authoritarian leaders, populist authoritarian leaders. And that's part of the picture of democratic backsliding. One last piece of motivation I want to give. If you ask citizens directly, how satisfied are you with democracy, or the typical question of support for democracy compared to other political regimes, that has also been going down on average in the world, and especially in Latin America and Mexico, which is the focus of this study. In particular, we're gonna show you in the first part data from Latinobarometro and satisfaction with democracy in this period, 2008-2018, has decreased from 45% that say they're very satisfied or satisfied with democracy to 30%. Similar downward trends are shown if we focus on the question of support for democracy. Okay, so this is just a plot of this data, Latinobarometer data, satisfaction with democracy for Mexico, for Latin America. So you can see for yourselves the downward trend there, those 10 years. And so one question that's very important is, what is causing this pattern? And there's several hypotheses out there. One is the rise of social media and the effect this may cause on polarization. Another one is economic stagnation. As you know, for example, in the US, wages haven't grown much. Another one has to do with the government, austerity policy or government gridlock in Congress, government effectiveness. We focus on a fourth cluster of explanations, which is corruption, typically defined as the misuse of public office for private gain. Now you may say, well, there's a wealth of hypotheses. Why focus on this one? I already cite Vargas Llosa, which is I like him a lot. So this is commonly mentioned by people that study democracy. So Jaworski mentions it, Diamond, and many others say corruption is part of the problem in the democratic backsliding trend. But also it fits the narrative of the drain the swamp narrative of the good people versus the corrupt elites. Okay? And it may particularly, also this may corruption may be damaging for authoritarian regimes as well. Some people have made arguments that can be particularly damaging for democracies because democracies rely on the promise of political equality, and corruption cuts to the heart of that. So beyond these arguments, just looking at the statistics, turns out that the trends on the democratic backsliding coincides with trends at the country year level on perception of corruption. Has been going up at the same time that support for democracy has been going down, but that correlation was also within person. It is true that people that feel there's more corruption in their country also think less of democracy. But you have a question? No. Is this true? Is it just perception? We're not going to take a very strong stance of whether it's perception or real of actual corruption. It's very hard to measure corruption, of course. To the extent that we can, we see that measures of bribes have been going up. And just looking at all the newspapers in Spanish and in English, let's say LexisNexis data set, shows that the number of mentions of corruption, the word corruption, has, let's say, normalized by the word Thursday, had tripled in Spanish and doubled in English. So this trend shows up in many different domains. That's why we think corruption is a good hypothesis to have ex ante. Here is just the same data we showed you before for support for democracy. Here we show it for a question Latinobarometer that says, what is the main problem in your country? And that's a multiple choice answer that has more than 30 answers, right? Crime, poverty, health, and one is corruption. And that has doubled for Latin America and almost tripled in Mexico during the sample period, okay? So, by the way, I was surprised that for the US in La Pop survey, the level of corruption perceived by the citizens is the same in the US than in Latin America. Of course, they may mean something different, but I was surprised by that fact. This is not something restricted to Latin America. Now, we want to focus just on corruption. We will focus on what we call apex corruption. I mean, this debate between the authors about using that word, but Somito really likes it. And we define apex corruption as corruption by very high-level politicians, presidents, cabinet members, Supreme Court justices, governors, members of the Senate. And there's no scarcity of corruption scandals in Latin America. These are just some of scandals we know about. And why do we focus on apex corruption? Well, we think that high-level politicians are in a place where they can have a big influence on significant parts of society or citizens. And why do we think they're in a unique place? Many reasons. One is just sheer publicity, right? Corruption scandals undertaken by the president, by the prime minister, just get a lot of attention from the media, and everybody knows about it. Just a matter of quantity of dissemination of information. But also beyond quantity of information in the media, if you think the president of a country is very corrupt, you may begin to distrust the institutions over which this person has control. Okay? Secondly, many see high-level politicians as examples to emulate. I mean, after all, they're very successful people. Finally, high-level politicians may be in a situation to affect beliefs of trustworthiness between citizens. How can this be the case? For example, if a president has been elected as very corrupt, citizens might infer that other citizens put little weight on moral values, for example. Okay? So for many reasons, we think studying high-level politicians is interesting and important, and there has not been a lot of that. Most studies on corruption and accountability literature have focused on municipality mayors, just maybe because you can get more sample size like that. Yeah. Okay, and finally, just in terms of sheer size, the magnitudes are big, right? Billions, we're talking about the billions of dollars. Just one scandal in Latin America gave $1 billion in price, but if you go to other countries, nations, and Africa, I mean, it's been claimed that presidents have stolen tens of billions of dollars. Okay. So studying corruption has a big, I'm an economist, for good or for bad, and studying corruption has a long tradition in economics. Economists have studied its extent, its source, its industrial organization, and policies to fight it. But surprisingly, there has been less research in economics studying its effect. Effect on what? So there's a couple of papers, recent papers, showing that corruption scandals by local politicians are associated with more cheating by citizens. For example, more cheating in exams in Mexico, or more stealing from the supermarkets in Italy. Okay? Most of the literature has studied re-election of mayors, for example. That's part of the literature. Even these papers on accountability, they have focused most on both chairs of incumbents and less so on the effect of corruption on support for democracy itself as a regime, not in a person or in a candidate, but as a regime. There's much less research on that. If I'm wrong, please correct me. I'd love to know the papers. And many of these papers, I was surprised to know, they have this Metaqueta study across many countries showing results of municipal audits wasn't powerful enough to change perceptions of corruption. And so the findings are very muted. In contrast, we're going to have a very strong treatment, as I will show you, and find very strong effects. Okay, so beyond voting, we're going to look at voting, but beyond voting, we want to also look at volunteering to support elections, reported trust and revealed trust in trust games on politicians and neighbors. We want to try to measure norms, honesty norms. And we do that because we think it is important in a democracy, in liberal democracy, there's complementary values that help support the democracy. So no tradition on that. And so we're going to try to measure those values. Okay, that's the motivation. Now, let me come back to the question, the main question we're interested in. Is apex corruption constantly undermining democracy? That's the question, the main question we care about. It's a very big question and not an easy one to answer. We're going to try two ways to answer it. One is with an observational study, which uses data, which uses corruption scandals in 17 Latin American countries during 10 years, in a span of 10 years. We like this study. I mean, it has advantages and disadvantages. One advantage of doing observational studies is that this is actually corruption scandals in the wild. This is as they happened. So that has substantial external validity. There's no experimental demand effects because there's no experiment here. But the cost of this, you will see, is we can only have a rigorous causal identification. We can only estimate very short-run effects. So we won't be able to answer the question of persistence using this method. Furthermore, we're going to be using surveys here, and outcomes are self-reported. Okay, Now, to go we cannot control content, and the dates are messy. So the Lula scandal, when did it happen? It has many stages. When he was convicted, when the news broke in the newspaper, so things are more messy in the real world. So we're gonna have a complementary strategy. This is a field experiment, an RCT in Mexico, where we expose citizens just before a midterm election. We expose them to footage of politicians taking stashes of cash from the incumbent party, from the opposition party. Then we can manipulate the content. We can manipulate the timing, randomize how close to the election we expose them to that. And then we can measure, we will link this with administrative data on voting. This is not self-reported data, this is actual voting measured by INE. We measured some proxies of, lab in the field proxies of democratic behaviors, trust games, and other games. So we try to be as comprehensive as possible in terms of outcomes and methods to answer this big question. Yeah.
Yes, I'm asking a loaded question given the group that's here, but we're looking across a bunch of countries, but they're all Latin American countries.
Yeah.
Do you want us to draw inference for democracy in general, or do you think there's characteristics in Latin America that are going to make the results Latin America specific?
Yeah, that's a very, very hard question because I don't have the data to answer that. So, I mean, I would like to think that some of the findings are more general. We find it in a very particular place in Mexico. We find it across 17 countries. But if you tell me, Joe, are you content with saying that this happens in Latin America? This is millions of people there. Are we content to that and not extrapolate? But it's very hard to extrapolate. Now, I wouldn't say this is one weakness of the paper, because we have this first strategy, which basically tries to address that issue of external validity.
Yeah, it's a strength.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the plan of the talk. Already gave you the motivation. Then I'm going to show you some results of the experimental study and the weaknesses of that study. And then we're going to try to address some weaknesses with the RCT. It's a kind of a longer presentation, so I'm going to take questions, but go whenever I think things are easy, I'll go fast. Okay, so what is the source of data in this observational study? Basically, two sources of data. I have two others here that I'm hiding. First, we want to know when corruption scandal happened, the exact days and where. And we want to know that an apex politician was involved. So what we did here was scrape the Twitter accounts for each of these 17 countries for the four main news channels of each of these countries for 10 years, looking for words related to bribe, corruption, etc. We got tens of thousands of news. We had to skim to them. It was a bit painful, but we ended up with a data set of corruption scandals or very high-level politicians. I'm going to say more about it in the next slides. What types of scandals? How do we define the apex scandal? Next slide will come. So that is going to be like the input. That's the shock. And what is the outcome? So we're going to use Latinobarometer survey as an outcome. The questions they have about perception of corruption, satisfaction with democracy. These are several reported questions, but very widely used and very common to other questions. You wouldn't let me lie in other countries. Well, same types of questions. So, how do we define a corruption scandal, an apex or scandal? We want it to be something big, right? So we only consider it if more than two agencies covered it, and they involve very high-ranking politicians, presidents, prime ministers, opposition leaders, Senate members, governors, and high-ranking judges. There's some element of subjectivity here. That's why we published the scandals, and people can criticize inclusion or exclusion. And also, point 3, we wanted to be news. So we wanted to see it was the first time this was mentioned, not refried from last week, because we are very concerned. We're going to exploit the exact timing of the corruption scandal to measure its effects. We ended up with 177 corruption scandals for 17 countries in 10 years. So almost one scandal per year per country. But unfortunately, only 26 of those intersect with the 2 months during which Latinobarometer is on the field doing the surveys. So the strategy is going to be the following. The empirical strategy is going to be the following. We're going to compare your answers, your perception of corruption, and your satisfaction with democracy just few days before, let's say 2 or 3 days before the corruption scandal happened, to the responses of citizens interviewed 1, 2, 3 days after the scandal happened. And we're going to claim this is the causal effect of the corruption scandal. Of course, we're assuming something, right? That citizens just before the scandal and just after the scandal have the same potential preferences for democracy. Well, that's unobservable, potential preferences, but what we can do is we can show that. So first, this is plausible ex ante because Latinobarometer doesn't change. They plan the field trips to do the surveys in advance, and they don't change the trip because the corruption scandal happened that day. But we can test whether in observables, right? Let's say in age, gender, education, socioeconomic status, people interviewed a few days before the scandal are the same as those after the scandals, and we actually test that, and we cannot reject they're the same. They look very similar. Yeah.
Enrique, this is a reported corruption event. Is that correct? As opposed to the actual corruption event, which could have happened 2 or 5.
No. This is the actual corruption event. This is the actual. This is when,
regardless of when it becomes reported, because you're assuming that when it happens, it's reported immediately, and that is not always.
No, yeah, you're right. When the news cover it.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it's a reported corruption event.
Correct.
Not the actual event.
Correct. Now you may be concerned, and this is a very valid concern, that newspapers are strategic of when to release this. So if they release it on the Monday, maybe more people read it about it. So, and 2 things I have to say to that. We couldn't predict, we're using day of the month or how far to the election it is. We cannot predict when this is reported. And why might this be the case in theory? Well, if 2 newspapers know the news, I cannot afford to be very strategic and wait because the other guy is gonna do it. But that's an assumption we're making here, an untestable assumption. So what kind of scandals are?
Latinobarometer can use the actual date of when they conduct the interview.
Yes, they have the actual date.
When they interview you and
Completely, which exact date. And this is very important because that's how we organize here the x-axis.
One of the ladies, to which just to finger in this, it could be that newspapers are strategic, often the judiciary is strategic. So
Yes.
So there's lots of strategic logics embedded here, and I think it's just worthwhile.
Exactly. Exactly. So we have to be very careful about the interpretation of this. We did everything we can to show that people are very similar. I mean, for the interpretation to be related, it has to be that people want interview 1 day after the scandal would really don't like democracy compared to those interviewed 1 day before. I mean, it's hard to, even if you're strategic, we're talking about in your neighborhood, one that was interviewed 1 day before you or after you. So we think it's very solid causal identification, but we also have the experiment.
Enrique,
Yeah.
just a clarifying question, just a notation. I see Y, ICT. Y is the outcome of interest, the
Yes.
towards democracy. ICT are what?
I is the person I in country C,
Country.
in country C in time period T. And
period T is what?
our days. Time is measured in days here. Yeah. Days with respect to when the corruption scandal happened. Okay, we can also have we have control here for country times a lot of variables regarding time, month, year, how close to the elections, right? The interaction of that, day of the week, if they happen on a Monday or a Tuesday, etc. So we show balance between the groups. I keep this slide, but these are the kinds of some examples of the kinds of scandals that are in the data set. Right, on Brazil and Guatemala and Mexico, Peru, Panama. Okay, and now even though just to repeat myself, we found 177 scandals during this period, we can only use the ones that fell in the middle of fieldwork or Latinobarometer to be able to use some. I'm using 26 of the 177 for this part. So it's a smallish sample, but we still get significant results. Okay.
Sorry. Do you have a way to establish kind of a rank ordering in terms of corruption scandals, the relevance of corruption scandals? Because some of them are have been accused of, as opposed to were found to have.
Yeah.
So do you distinguish those within the sample?
That's a very good question, and we can do it. We haven't done it. Why? And so two other things we can do. Is this the incumbent or the opposition? Is this a populist or a non-populist? My problem I would love to do that. My problem is that we have 26 observations. So as soon as I start building it, we don't have much.
You're also constraining for these things to be scopes. So it's most likely it is
The first
you're
time.
accused of.
Yeah.
It's the scope you're constraining the thing to be like that.
Yes, I agree. But yeah, the sample size is really limiting here. That's why we have the other experiment too. But I think we learned some things from this observational experiment. These are so I'm gonna show you results on 4 variables, right? First is corruption perception is equal to 1. It's a dummy if they say corruption is the main problem of a country. I showed you the graph at the beginning for this variable across time. And then we have an index, standardized index for support for democracy, which is basically satisfaction with democracy and support for democracy, the typical questions you know and love. Stop me if you want me to give details. Then Latinobarometer asks also about trust in different democratic institutions, the federal government, Congress, political parties, and even the Electoral Institute. We take this and make a standardized index, trust in institutions. And then Latinobarometer, not every year, but some years, they ask a question related to how amenable they would be to have an authoritarian power. For example, this one, I would support a military government instead of a democratic one. That was asked these 3 years, but then they changed. I wouldn't mind if a democratic government came to power, or more than political parties in Congress, what we need is a strong leader. So we take this and it's a yes or no question. We make it equal to 1. If you said yes, that's what we need, and 0 otherwise. Okay, so we have these 4 outcome variables, the Y's, defined at the personal level. Okay, so we run the regression I showed you, and we find this, right? There is an increase in the fraction of people that say corruption is the main problem. How big is it? 3 percentage points compared to the mean. That's 30% of the mean. We have this democratic index is measured in standard deviations and normalized. That's why it's 0 the mean, but that's 0.07 standard deviations. I will give you a benchmark next slide. How do we interpret these points? Is it big, small, or what? Next slide, I'll talk about it. Trust in democratic institutions also decreases, and the authoritarian index, people are more willing to have an authoritarian in power after they hear about the corruption scandal. Now, one thing, I don't know if they saw the corruption scandal. So half of the people may not know it. So this is an intent to treat estimate. Okay. It's just a few ways to benchmark that effect. 0.07 standard deviation is about the difference between Chile and Bolivia in terms of support for democracy, or between Brazil and Honduras. Correlation is equivalent to having a university degree versus just high school. And also correlationally is equivalent to self-reported being at the top 1/4 of the income distribution. Another way to benchmark this is that if scandals accumulated linearly, this is one scandal, by the way, these effects. If scandals accumulated linearly, that's a huge assumption, it will take 5 scandals to explain the whole democratic backsliding. Okay, so here I just saw my event studies to show you how the data looks across time. We tend to have good pre-trends before and then the expected sign after, right? For the 4 variables I showed you. So this seems to be, in order, Guillermo, for this strategy to fail, it will be, they hit at the right time, the corporate scandals. Just after it happened, after, not before. So is this, I mean, this may be driven by pessimism. People may be pissed off, right, after seeing the president in the morning, but it doesn't show on other opinions. So they're not angry across the board. It seems to be focused on the political system. If I ask them satisfaction with the economic system or support for the economic system, which is the same pair of questions that we did for democracy, there's no effect there. Okay, so it's concentrated on political institutions. If they're in a bad mood, they're in a very particular bad mood about political institutions. Yeah.
It would be nice to have placebo tests like this, but for political outcomes that are not connected with the nature of the scandal. Like they shouldn't update their preferences on local politicians' corruption.
Yeah.
Because it's economic, there are things political, and you see everything political changing, so maybe it's that. So it would be nice to have more political placebo.
Yeah, we can do that. We will do that. Now, I'll show you in the RCT that there's spillovers across society, even to the extent of trusting neighbors. Right? I'm going to show you the evidence to see if it's convincing or not. You tell me. So the placebo, we have to be careful with placebo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
For the RC, just thinking about mechanisms. It seems to me that there are 2 things that are necessary. One is that there is a prior that is updated once you receive this information shock. So somehow they thought that the corruption was smaller than actually is. And the second thing is the assumption that the less democratic governments are less corrupt.
Yeah.
And then I'm wondering if there is this paper from Stefania Sancheva that people who grow up in periods of economic growth, they believe less in the zero-sum game kind of perspective. I don't know if you have enough variation to say something about people who live during dictatorships or not.
That's very, very, very nice. So 3 things during dictatorship. So on the first one, on the priors, in the experiment, we measure priors, we measure prior, or we try, and we do have very different results depending on the prior. And the Ferraz and Finan famous paper in Brazil, if you look at it carefully, the effect only comes from a lot of corruption. Actually, if there's corruption, but not too much, the mayor, the incumbent actually is better off. So it takes a lot of corruption to change the perception in Brazil. But so the short answer is that priors are very important, and we're gonna try to look at that in the experiment. The other you mentioned.
You have to believe that less democratic
Yes.
governments
So exactly. So what's the alternative? You say, okay, the democracy sucks, but it's not because you can't consider the alternatives, as Churchill said. No. So what is happening with how people are conceptualizing the alternative? And there, as you will see in my conclusion, there we're weak because we didn't ask how do you think how corrupt authoritarian regimes or China or Venezuela. We didn't ask that question. But there's a paper on QJE on behavioral economics saying that people fail to consider the alternatives. In some cases, we make a choice. But you're right. It could be that people are pissed off and they don't consider the alternative. Basically, screw everything.
Are you able, I don't know if you are able to test effects across different political affiliations or support for that incumbent?
Yes, so we're gonna do that, not in here, but in the RCT. Okay. Yeah, we're gonna do that.
Enrique?
Yeah.
I'm having a hard time thinking about I know you had to do this simplification that all corruption scandals are somewhat similar.
Yeah.
Do you estimate this through two-way fixed effects, right?
Well, no, that's 2 questions, right? Let me stop you there to write it. So I didn't assume that all corruption scandals are similar. I'm estimating an average effect of many different things. That's different, right?
Yeah, but what I have in mind is that maybe using like some heterogeneous estimator will be more suitable to this
Yeah.
case. I don't think you have a lot of power to do it, but
Yeah, no, maybe not in the, for sure not in the event study, but in the RCT I may have. So bring it in the RCT. Yeah. Yeah, so you, and then,
You tried expanding the sample window to see if this is persistent, because this is like 2 weeks after a big.
yeah, so,
Right.
yes, so if I mean, I showed you we can go 15 days and 15 days before. And I mean, it doesn't show very immediate depreciation of the effects. But what we do in the RCT, we go to homes and we visit them months later. And that is a better setup to look at persistence. The farther I go here, the less predictable the identification strategy is. Yeah, it's more different people, different neighborhoods. Yeah, but we try to do something on persistent on the RCT. Yeah. Yes.
So you were saying at the beginning that there are more mentions about corruption today than in the past.
Yeah.
But also people now are more aware about corruption than in the past. I remember I work as a criminal lawyer in many anti-corruption missions, and the World Bank and the IMF started to talk about corruption at the end of the 90s.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we should have, or do you have the assumption that because there are more mentions, that means that there is more corruption? Because it's kind of a paradox, because today we have also more mechanisms to fight corruption.
No, I don't.
So I don't know if the big scandals truly reflect the impact of corruption in democracy, or it's more the perception about these scandals and how they are framed by the media, which is affecting perceptions of corruption instead of the corruption scandals per se, because they are also very difficult to prosecute.
No, I got it. So two answers. The paper doesn't rely on there being a close association between perceptions and reality in corruptions. We don't assume any other relationship works. What you're seeing here is, in the previous slide, you show what is the effect of an actual corruption scandal being displayed in the media. Okay, I don't know if it's true, if he's guilty or not, right? That's very hard to know when somebody's guilty or not. But are these corruption scandals having an effect on your opinion on democracy, right? That's what we're gonna, what I showed you. And what I'm gonna show you in the next one, in this RCT, is I'm gonna show you actual footage of politicians taking stashes of cash. But this is real videos. So this is real corruption happening. And I'm gonna show citizens that and see how they respond to that.
And the other thing is that if everybody's aware of corruption, you make your results even more surprising because you're telling people something that they already know and they're responding to.
That's a very good question. And in the RCT, we try to split the sample. We ask them, have you seen this corruption scam?
Yeah.
And about half said, yes, I have. And half said, no, first time I see something like that. The effects are bigger for the ones who have not seen the scandal, but they're not zero for the ones that claim to have seen it. So it could be like a reminder effect. Yeah. Okay. So, okay. Let me just go here. So for other reasons, we discussed persistence and the fact that we want to look at behaviors, not just the answers in the survey. We did an RCT. But to give you the flavor of the RCT, let me tell you a couple of things about the context. We did the RCT just before the 2021 midterm elections, where deputies for federal Congress, mayors, and local Congress were up for a vote. And this is a very particular setting because 3 years before, AMLO won the presidency. And he won the presidency in a situation where basically all his campaign, but Memo can correct me here, was about fighting corruption. He made this very salient, even in the name of the new party he created, Morena. It's called Movimiento de Regeneración Nacional, like National Regeneration Movement, like a moral claim. And he said, we're not the same, and honestidad valiente, courageous honesty. So there was a campaign run 100% on an anti-corruption platform. Now he won by citizens seem to believe him. He won by a landslide, more than 30 percentage points with respect to the second place. If you look, I was very impressed by this. The Mexican government, INEGI, makes 2-year surveys of quality of government and corruption. And in the national statistics, you could see they ask, do you think the Mexican president is corrupt? And that fell by 20 percentage points, 21 percentage points from the year before to the year after. So people seem to believe him, well, a lot of people, that he was clean. And because the party was new, there was no much to attach to the party. Actually, in our own survey, we asked them, do you think Morena is more, who's more corrupt, Morena or PAN, PRD, PRI? And only 4% think the PAN, PRI, PRD are more corrupt than Morena. So very different priors here. Okay, Morena is believed to be cleaner than the alternatives. So much so that we pre-registered this hypothesis that we expect we're going to show big footage of Morena-related parties taking bribes and PAN-PRI-related parties taking bribes. And we hypothesized that because all Mexicans already believe that PRI is completely corrupt, this was no news, and for Morena it would be news. So we thought it was going to have a higher effect, and in fact we do find that. I'll show you. So where did this happen? This experiment we couldn't do nationally. I wish we could, but it was very expensive. We went house to house. This is not online, and we selected this state of Oaxaca. It's a great place to visit. I recommend it. We went to more than 30,000 households. We selected precincts randomly, and within each precinct, the survey company drew some routes, and we knocked on doors on those routes. And we did a survey. I'm going to explain that. And another reason, we like Oaxaca because it's very big and diverse. It has about 1/5 of all Mexican municipalities are in Oaxaca. It is on the top tercile of corruption in the country, so they know what they're talking about. And AMLO also won big in Oaxaca, but still PRI survived. The governor was from PRI when we were there. Okay, so what we did, we went there door to door and did a 30-minute survey. How very little time, right? 15 minutes with questions and all that. 15 minutes and then questions. Okay. So we went there with a Samsung tablet and we made a survey. And then in the middle of the survey, we asked them, can I show you a short video? And they said, yes. So we passed the survey to the respondent and they saw a 3-minute video where 1 minute was devoted to talking about official statistics on bribe taking and corruption. And 2 minutes had actual footage of politicians taking bribes. Like what? Like this. This is footage of the brother of the president taking bribes, counting stashes of cash. These are senators from the opposition parties taking millions. Film that now you may say this is crazy. This is not uncommon in Latin America. They film themselves maybe to enforce collusion. So you have a threat on the other, but so we have these videos of them taking cash. And we like this because compared to the audits of municipal accounts, this is like very in your face. But you don't have to be an accountant to understand what's happening here. Okay, so we have 4 videos and a no video control group. The first video is for the incumbent, for the Morena party. Second video is for the opposition parties. Then we have an economic performance video. We want to say, well, maybe if they're unhappy with the economy, the same would happen with democracy. Will also be angry against democracy, unsupportive. And then my co-authors Amita said, hey, this is only bad news. Like you're so negative. Give them something good. So we commission a very nice video. Actually, I'm gonna put it in my webpage about very professionally done on what unites us as Mexicans, culture, history, even earthquakes. And we randomized also not only what they saw, but when they saw it. A month before the election or a week before the election. We could only randomize the timing in Oaxaca City for logistical reasons, not in the other municipalities. We have 69 municipalities. Okay, so more questions. I mean, this could be good. I mean, if I look at it, the media is holding politicians accountable by releasing these videos. So citizens may think, well, this means that they're fighting these guys, the corrupt guys, the fact that it appears in the media. So that's good for democracy, and I like that this is happening. It's an accountability channel, but this could be also a discriminant channel, which everything is rotten here or the same. It doesn't worth pursuing this by the vote, etc. So we're gonna ask. A lot of the literature has focused on the accountability side, but less so in this discrediting side. So are the effects? Do effects go beyond the vote and are reflected in beliefs, on trust, right? Internalized norms of honesty and the willingness to collaborate with institutions. And we're gonna try our best to have measures of each of these 4 things here. Do the effects persist? And how do the effects compare with revelations of economic ineffectiveness? Is it particularly damaging that if Mexico is doing very badly economically for the last 3 decades, or is that more damaging for turning out to vote than a corruption scandal of the president, or no? Yeah.
I have a question about the design. So are you revealing these videos to individuals that previously didn't see a corruption scandal at all or related to the video that you're showing, or it's just making salient the
Good point. So we did ask them if they have seen the video, and about half of them told us they have seen. So we can estimate separately for those, and the effect is a bit bigger for the ones that haven't seen it, but it is not 0 for the ones that have seen it. Okay. So this is just the timing. I'm going to skip it. We did surveys before the election when we gave this treatment. We couldn't finish the rural areas before the election, and then we go 3 months later for the same people, interview the same people, and that was very costly. And we just to measure persistence. Same questionnaire, same people, just 3 months later. The specification is the nice of the experiment is that it's very. All the work comes before the econometrics, or most of the work. So we have indicators for whether you saw what we call the corruption and incumbent video, the Morena video, the opposition video, which is Pan and PRI, the nation building video, the economic video. Okay, I'm gonna skip this. Now, what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna have 4 slides on voting, on trust, on different things. Okay, and then I'm gonna put one quote from one of my different heroes of mine. This is John Stuart Mill talking about voting. And now you may say, well, why would this have an effect on voting? Theoretically, what could be an explanation for that? And I told you it could go either way. I mean, an accountability channel would imply that you were willing to punish the corrupt politicians and go more to vote and punish. Right? So turnout could increase by this channel. But also this, what I call this creating channel, which there's reasons to believe that turnout could decrease. Why? There's at least 2 types of models in economics here. One is the ethical voting models, where citizens have voted beyond their individual self-interest and have more concerns. This is the way people have tried to explain why people vote at all. Okay, so to the extent that this more concern is hampered by corruption scandals, you may be less willing to go and vote. Alternatively, a more plain vanilla model is if there's a fixed cost of going to vote, and suddenly you see that Morena is as corrupt as the others, right? There's less differentiation between parties. They're all the same. it's not worth it to go and make a choice if parties become more homogeneous. Those are more classical models that would predict that turnout may decrease. So what do we find? Sorry, I'm going too slow. I'm gonna concentrate here on this is actual vote measured with, I mean, this is not self-reported, this is actually going to vote measured by INE. And what we see is that, and I'm putting the two treatments there, people go less to vote. How much less? Between 4 and 6 percentage points less. Is this big or not? It's in the middle of the distribution of many turnout the vote campaigns, right? Maybe a bit on the high end, but within the interval of effects. Now, if I give you the information 1 week before the election, this decreases turnout by 15 percentage points. So it's a very big effect. Now, look at what happens when I contrast this with the economic. I didn't talk, let me say something about the economic video. The economic video is also a 3-minute video where we show data comparing the growth in Mexico, poverty, etc., across many countries in Latin America. And Mexico doesn't perform very well even compared to Latin America. And also, we also say something about this was during COVID a bit. This was middle of 2021, and Mexico didn't basically help. They spent a lot during COVID to help firms or people. We also mentioned compare that to other countries. What we find there is a positive effect on turnout, right? One interpretation of that is that what if I show you the president is taking, or the family of the president is very corrupt, you can say, screw it, I'm not voting. But if I show you that Mexico is not performing very well in terms of growth, economic growth and policies, you may say, well, this is fixable by the vote. I can maybe go and fix that. But if the system is rotten, there's no point of it going to vote. That's one interpretation of these results, right? But it was striking to us that the sign is different. One depresses voting, the other increases voting. Now, let me skip this. Now, we also, this is not a administrative data, because this is who do you vote for. Hopefully, I shouldn't know this from my data, but so we asked them, we came back weeks later after the election, and we asked them, who did you vote for, to try to measure shares. And what we see here is that if I gave them the incumbent video, they vote less for the incumbent party. How much less? 18 percentage points. That's a big effect. And analogously for the opposition party. So even while turnout is decreasing, the shares, there's some punishment. Shares are changing. Okay. So that was, yeah.
Does this retrospective coefficients add up to the actual coefficients?
No. So people, the question, Jeremy, is if I said, did you vote? And you asked.
This is conditional.
No, let me see if I understood your question. Your question is what people report this voting the same as what they are? No, the answer is like 20 percentage points difference. Okay. People inflate self-reported voting by a lot. So I have the same person with admin data, that's pretty unique, and with self-reported data, and the difference is very big between what they say and what they do. So
You're incumbent?
No. We can, so two, three more things. We asked them, I'm gonna go very fast here, sorry. We asked them, hey, do you want to become an election observer? That's a formal official procedure. They give you a tag and you can go and to the different poll booth and look at that. You have to take an online course of about 5 hours. And so we asked them to enroll in the course. And because we couldn't wait many hours, we began help them enroll right there and then. We asked them to, if they wanted to enroll, it's voluntary, and that we could help them, but we would need to input in the webpage the ID number of their credencial elector. And so they did show that to us. So it's not for free for them. It took time, and also they have to reveal some information about themselves. We look at that, and we also ask them, funcionarios de casilla in Mexico, the booth workers are volunteers. Would you want to donate to bring water to them? And we actually did bring water to them. We had a piggy bank, and they put some donations, about 20% put some donations to them. So we find that after, and from here on, I separate the left-wing government from the corruption opposition. We see that they're less willing to register as electoral observers, and they're less willing to donate of their own money to buy water for booth workers. No effect for the other videos, the national building and the economic video. Trust. We made them play. I mean, we made them answer questions on trust, like Latinobarometer, but we also made them play a trust game for about a fourth of the minimum wage. This is a typical trust game. Two players, one player sends money, 1, 2, 3, or 4 coins of 10 pesos, and the receiving player can choose to return some coins, and the referee, which is me, multiply that by 3. Okay. So this part was very expensive. Actually, we gave. I have a story here. I'm gonna take 10 seconds. We did it with real coins. So when I saw how many coins it was half a ton of coins. And so the bank told me, I called a friend, he told me, yeah, come and pick them up. I said, are you crazy? Like half a ton? First, you're gonna break my back, and second is Mexico. They're gonna take the but we managed to do it. So they trust. So they actually played against a real politician because one of the authors, his parents know people, and so a politician played the whole strategy of the returning game. And so they trust politicians less. One good thing is that Mexicans were not, so they trust politicians less, but also they play the strategy with a random neighbor. The effect is also there, much smaller, like half the size, but they trust in this game neighbors to return less. Now, we wanted to measure internalized norms. That's very hard to do. And so it has to be something, some action you have to take, for which there is no punishment. So the punishment is internal, psychological. And so what we did, we played a game where we gave them again coins, 30 coins, and we said, Aníbal, go to your room, play, I'm gonna give you 10 coins, throw them, each of them. If you guess right, just put it in your pocket, it's yours. You have to, tails or head, you have to guess right. If you don't guess right, you have to put it in this envelope. And this envelope is gonna be for a public project in the municipality. And so they played by themselves this game. They came with a sealed envelope, gave it to the enumerator, and the enumerator gave it to us. Now, what is nice about that game is Aníbal can be very lucky and can guess right a lot of coins and tails, but on average, I can pretty much tell if they are stealing from this municipal fund. We find that they steal more. They steal more from these funds. But not so much from the neighbor. Okay, so fund we're going to distribute to the neighbors.
The effect only holds for the corrupt incumbent treatment of Palermo?
Yes, correct. So all of the effects are concentrated in the corrupt incumbent. And our explanation is exactly the priors. That for the free, they already knew that. We'll use here. Now finding values, and here we use the same kind of indices we had from before, right? Also pre-specified the typical things that are asked in the questionnaires. And so we have 4 indices. One of measuring corruption perceptions, one of satisfaction or support for democracy, trust in political institutions, and trust in people. In people means we have 3 questions: a general trust question, which is typical, but also people, a citizen from Oaxaca or a neighbor. And what we find is that those that saw I'm pulling together both here, and the corruption perception increases, satisfaction or support for democracy decreases, trust in democratic institutions decreases, and same for people. And here I split by, incumbent or non-incumbent. Okay, so I'm gonna skip this and go to the conclusion. We have some placebo outcomes, but given the time, I'm gonna go to the conclusion. What we conclude from this is that apex corruption revelations seen by these two very different methods do decrease support for democracy and voting and even civic behaviors, right? Donating time for organizing elections, trusting others, even stealing from a common pool. Now so this highlights one trade-off that we think is not very highly appreciated. On the one hand, disclosing corruption is necessary for accountability. It's hard to keep it secret, and that could be good. But it also has this other dark side that it undermines support for democracy. Now, there's many things we couldn't do. For example, Aitor had a question here. What is the alternative to this? I would conjecture that if we had reminded them, hey, look, the alternative is Russia or Venezuela, they may be more careful when changing their opinions. Another thing that we couldn't do is, well, maybe what matters is not the disclosure, is that if you disclose but punish the politicians, that would be good for support for democracy. We couldn't do that because even Lula, took how many years was he guilty? Was he punished? It's very unclear who's guilty here, and just take years, decades. So we couldn't do that. But it would be nice to see if once he's punished, this erosion gets undone. And finally, corruption is bad everywhere. Would the same, this is more to Joseph's questions, would the same have happened if we do it in Russia? I don't know if that will happen the same effect. And that's all what I have. Welcome more of the questions.
We have a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I'm doing work on support for democracy, and this is some of the best I've seen. You don't sell it enough, actually. I wouldn't create Vargas with the idea, but you're absolutely right that it hasn't been tested enough by being implemented. So the question I'm wondering about, you cite the Meta project and so many no findings.
Yeah.
Clearly the outcome is different, right?
Yeah.
But the logic should not be so different, right? So if you're updating your preference on something, why is it that all these papers even find something I didn't? So I think perhaps, and this is
an opinion there.
So, well, I give you two ideas and then you tell me. But so one thing you're doing here that is really nice is that you have treatments for different perpetrators of corruption.
Yeah.
And that could really unpack the priors. And so what could be masking the effects in the other work is that. And there are things that this is high profile, where the other stuff is a bit more. But I would really try to find a way of accounting for the null findings in the other literature and what's specific about this setting that makes you, because some null findings actually are in Mexico.
Yeah.
And their quick point goes back to something that Laura raised, is that some of them, the literature argues that you don't find effects of corruption because people have other political affiliations, right? So in Brazil, you don't respond to corruption because you think that corruption allegations are lawfare and all this. So then actually those are the ones who care about corruption.
Yeah.
So I think it would be interesting to try to unpack the effect by partisanship. Yeah. So for example, it would be interesting, I would be curious to see whether the incumbent corruption holds for Morena supporters, right?
Yeah, very, very nice.
So that will also speak to our literature, which claims that the null findings come from this politicization.
Very, very nice.
So those are,
Well, very nice. So one, I have my opinion on why other studies haven't found these effects. So one is that the treatment is very light. If you see Ana de la O and Chong and Carlan, they have a flyer that's not very clear. And talking about something very technical, part of the problem there is that they say, no, the mayor spent less than he was supposed to. And that's the bad behavior they find, that they publicize. but it's almost like accounting. And here it's very in your face. Oh, this is a guy that is taking money. So it's very easy to understand. It's not technical at all. That's one possibility. The other possibility is we're randomizing at the individual level. That affords a lot of statistical power, where there's this many of the papers, certainly Ana de la O and other papers randomized at the municipality level or the precinct level. So that affords less statistical power. That's a second reason. If you see in the Metaqueta studies, they gave me the corruption treatment, and they asked them, do you think there's corruption in your country? That doesn't move. So it's very hard to find a second stage if there's no first stage. So my impression is that the treatments are very weak. Now you have a second comment, which I have here. So we did split this by Morenistas and non-Morenistas, and it could go either way. Motivated reasoning would say, no, that's fake news. It's not the brother of the president. We don't find differences. We don't find evidence for motivated reasoning. We found that they believe that, maybe again, because it's very hard to deny until AI came. It's very hard to deny that's the brother of the president and he's taking money. Maybe if I say a paper signed by an accountant, who knows? But we didn't find evidence for motivated reasoning here. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, sure. So I had a couple of questions. So sort of thinking about your research on mostly voting for sure on corruption. The literature in Latin America found, using survey experience, this is not randomized controlled trials, that really there are other things that matter when in people's reaction to information on corruption, like the source of the corruption accusation, like whether it is co-partisan or is not co-partisan, right? And so I wonder how that, if that's something you can account for, is that something you're thinking about accounting for? But the other thing I was thinking, and this is just a couple of recommendations, Nara Palau has fantastic work on corruption, and she has a JOP that discusses how people become more cynic as corruption becomes more pervasive, and thus less likely to sort of react to corruption accusations. And then this is probably not going to fall into your radar because it's really not that much quantitative, but Ezequiel González Ocantos, Paula Muñoz, Nara Palau, Viviana Barbar just published a book that kind of tackles that, one of those last questions for future research that you were posing on whether punishing actually matters. And they find out that the actual punish creates a lot of disenchantment and actually increases kind of distaste for corruption. So it might be useful.
No, if you can send it to me, Laura, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I'll send you, I'll send you both sides.
Thank you. Yeah.
So very quickly, first, this is fascinating, and I love this sort of interdisciplinary dialogue that is entailed here. So very much welcome. I would say I would invite you to perhaps think about whether this is a paper about apex corruption or about scandals about apex corruption. And I think this speaks a little bit, I think Joe had asked the question about scope conditions, whether this is just Latin America or this can be sort of a more cross-regional claim. I would say, I would invite you to be more careful on the conceptual claims and because they have theoretical implications even for the empirical analysis. So one thing is to have, there's exposure and exposure. There's exposure through scandals, and I think you're picking up scandals through your sort of data generation process through social media. So one thing is scandals. Something different is sort of journalistic investigation. Something different is a truth commission. Something different is a public prosecutor. So I think it would be very interesting just to make the distinction between the scandal, the prosecutorial, so whether people learn that the prosecutor is looking into, or the sentencing. I would distinguish it from punishment. Because there is some good, law enforcement here. So it would be interesting just to parcel out and just to think of what is it that you're saying, because I view this very differently when I think of these results. It's fascinating results. but when I view them through a standpoint of scandals rather than law enforcement or exposure through a democratic, I mean, scandals can be motivated by so many strategic reasons.
Yeah, no, I agree. I would say that this is about scandals. It's about high-level corruption scandals. Yeah, it's not about punishment from the scandals, and it's not about corruption itself. Also, it gets pretty close, Guillermo, on the. It's hard to say this is just fake news, right? Because I showed you people taking bribes, so it gets pretty clear. It's the revelation of. I mean, if I wanted to be very descriptive and don't know very good interpretation, it's the revelation of high-level politicians taking bribes. What happens? What is the effect of that? When I show you what happens, has nothing to do with the justice system or tangentially. Yeah,
because it's actually, the videos that you show. Now we know that authorities actually let the brother of the president free.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a context, going back to context, of very high impunity.
Yeah.
And that also filters into how people view this.
Exactly. But yes. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for this fascinating work. My question is related to the outcomes, the implication for democracy. I think you do have to measure the satisfaction with democracy and what was the other one? Support for democracy. And for me, it seems like there should be, have you tried treating them separately and do they operate differently? Because in my mind, if I see corruption, why should I support democracy less? There's corruption, so I don't support democracy anymore. Am I going for authoritarian? Doesn't that make it even worse? And so I'm thinking, are they then linking the corruption? Are they saying there's an outcome of democracy? What is the mechanism that they seeing the corruption, then thinking that this is an outcome of democracy and saying, I don't support democracy anymore?
Yeah.
Or sort of democracy as a regime, then are they having a different understanding of democracy as a regime or as a system of governance? And that is making them behave differently. And I think you do raise those questions of what is, if I told you the option, then it's living in Russia or, it's a different kind of regime with that. Because it seems like it's very similar, but at the same time, they actually should be opposite, right? If I'm dissatisfied, I should want more democracy, better democracy, right? And so, And my other question is related to the first video, which is the brother of the president. I know you're looking at high-ranking officials, but is the brother himself a politician in this case? How are people perceiving him? Because is his only lane being the brother of the president, or does he occupy a certain position within the government, and does that even matter at all?
Those are very, very good questions. Very good. So on the first question, I know what happens, or actually happens when they see this information that they claim to support democracy less, that they vote less, they move less willing to donate time for elections. That's just a fact in the data. Now, your question is very deep: is why is this happening? Because there's few alternatives to democracy to fight corruption. And there I have not much to say why citizens are behaving this way. One thing I conjecture is that they're not fully considering the alternatives. So what we know is that so one possibility is that they don't know the alternatives very well. They don't know what it's like to live in Russia or Venezuela. They just know that they don't like what they're seeing now. And so incomplete consideration of alternatives may be a possible explanation here. But I cannot just, it's just a story. I have no way to show it. You had a second question I'm forgetting.
The video.
The video. So he doesn't have a position in the cabinet, but it was clear. This was ridiculous because in Mexico things happen. They say, well, the president accepted it. Say, yeah, but it's for a cause. It's for a good cause. It's illegal. He did, but it's for a good cause. He was supporting a movement. So and then nothing happened to him after 7 years.
2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, they
Exonerated him. You cannot have better evidence than this. And the president accepted that he took his money.
Yeah, thank you again for your talk. I think that it's really difficult to measure the impact on democracy and I think this is really interesting. I was wondering to what extent there's no like a discussion about the cases where corruption scandals trigger social movements for a change, for a positive change. So I'm thinking, for instance, the case of Honduras when the Institute for Social Security figured a big movement that changed regulations, the constitution, or the case of the last election in Panama, the presidential election, when this corruption scandal of the water supply made people switch to a different candidates, or Bolivia with the current crisis of oil. So I don't know how to have a broader discussion about cases where corruption actually these scandals are positive to trigger a change, and cases where it's undermining democracy. And the second question that I have is like, I don't know if you have think more broadly about scandals, political scandals in general, and not only about political scandals, corruption scandals, because I am thinking in the case of Mexico in the last election for governor in Nuevo León, where the Morena candidate was in the first place of the polls, but then there was this scandal where she was involved with this Nixium sect in the US, and then that lowered the voter turnout, people prefer a different candidate, so there was a lot of turmoil about that political situation. So I don't know if the same people are exposed to scandals, political scandals, no matter if they are related to corruption or no, we might have a similar effect. So it's more a discussion about the media impacting people's minds rather than a corruption per se situation.
Okay, so those are some difficult questions. So of course, I cannot say whether in the long run, this is good for democracy. Right? That's a good point. It could be good, but it may trigger something that may trigger something else that may lead to protests and a better regime. And that's very hard for me to address in any of the two methods we use. Unfortunately, I cannot say much about that. On the whether other types of behavior of politicians has similar effects or not, also that's hard to do. But we can say a bit more that we tried economic ineffectiveness, right? Nothing happened. Well, turnout increased, but nothing much more happened in the other outcomes we measured. But I think it's yes, I cannot say that would be outside the data to say what would have happened if you showed this sort of thing. The honest answer is I don't know. But I think one thing I would like about this project is that we can study one question with two methods in different countries, in one country, with actual behaviors and not just self-reported outcomes. And we find a pretty consistent story that they're more dissatisfied and they participate less after seeing these corruption scandals. And I think, I do have to moderate the language. Yeah.
You may have time for one.
Yes, sure.
That's why colleagues do it. They ask the audience. Sorry.
My work is comparative historical analysis rather than statistical analysis, although I surveys and stuff like that. But I would suggest that you try to run all of this data with Western democracies. Western democracies defined as countries in the Western European cultural space, Catholic, Protestant, not the countries of the East. They're the core of the countries where democracies began. And this would multiply the number of cases that you have, and you avoid then the problem of taking Latin America, where there are 3 countries consistently in every international ranking that rank in the top 15, right? That's Uruguay, Chile, and Costa Rica, right? And so those are the countries that are outliers in terms of being much more less corrupt, more democratic. But if you multiply the number of cases, you're adding the West European ones. then, and the US and Canada and so on, then I think that the statistics would be a little bit more trustworthy, like a little bit more convincing. That's one point. The second point is that there are very serious problems in using the word trust when one analyzes Latin American countries or Spanish-speaking countries or even French Latin languages. And that's in the US, in English, coming from the old Baltic and Scandinavian origins. The word trust comes from the Scandinavian origins. And it is used in English such that there are two words, confidence and trust. In Spanish and in French, there's only confianza, confiance, je confie. In other words, the term trust doesn't really exist in the way people respond to questions about trust in Latin America. And so I'm always very skeptical of any survey, and the book is top of the line on that makes a big ado about trust when there's that linguistic problem.
I see. No, very good comments. No, we should, I would love to expand the study to other countries, including the US.
Yeah, including the US.
Yeah. Yes. And actually,
the US ranks way below Costa Rica, Uruguay, and Chile, and on all of these dimensions, even democracy.
And that's, I mean, both democracy and corruption are very prominent now in the US. I would love to do that. Actually, you'll be receiving a grant proposal for that. But I agree with you. And then also help me address some of the comments. Would the effect be the same in more authoritarian countries? I mean, they also don't like corruption. They also will be angry with the regime.
Yeah, but Chile during Pinochet was always less corrupt than Brazil under democracy.
Yeah,
and also there's a certain culture of corruption where people sugarcoat it. So the expression in Brazil, "Poupa mais faz," right?
Yeah. In Mexico too.
Poupa mais faz, it's so big deal if you go. The question is whether he does something.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
And that doesn't exist at all in Chile. You never hear that.
Yes, it's very interesting. And we could do that. Of course, we will lose this very nice thing of having voting data, right? To do it, I mean, we have survey data, but it's worth doing it. I agree. And on the same question, so I haven't.
Yeah, I would stick with democracy. So we're not doing that. I would not touch the authority.
No, okay. No, but I would love to do that. That'll be, it's in the agenda. Yeah.
And unfortunately, we have exceeded our time, but thank you so much for this. Thank you.